whispered, slow, commanding tone. They were never supposed to exist. Not in this century, not in this country. But behind locked doors, far from the eyes of the world, something ancient and forbidden was still happening. Flesh folding into itself, bloodlines looping, and children born of silence, speaking only in grunts, if they spoke at all. You've heard the stories, fictional, distant, buried in medieval books. But this isn't fantasy. It isn't Europe. It's America, the land of freedom, power, and progress, still carrying ancient blood curses in its hidden corners. Tonight I'm going to show you something you weren't meant to see. Not just broken people, but broken timelines. Daughters who were also sisters. Mothers who were once fathered by their own fathers. Whole families collapsed inward like a genetic black hole no one dared to name. And make no mistake, this isn't about gossip. This is about control. Because what happens when a community becomes so isolated, so deeply entangled in its own beliefs, that reality itself bends to protect the bloodline? You're about to hear stories that were never supposed to reach your ears, stories that institutions ignored, that neighbors whispered about but never intervened. Because to interfere would be to expose a system, a centuries-old machine of silence, shame, and sacred lies. Let me ask you something. What if your very DNA was your prison? What if you were born into a bloodline so compressed by incest that your mind never fully formed, your body never developed, and your name was erased before it was ever spoken? That is what happened to Gracie. Born in Odd, West Virginia, a town so isolated it might as well have fallen off the map. Her parents were cousins. Their parents were twins. Gracie was never given a chance. But what makes her story dangerous isn't just the genetics. It's the pattern, the repetition, with the family closed in around her like a fortress of flesh and fear. And she wasn't alone. This is only the beginning. The descent starts here, and it only goes deeper from now on. Narrator tone, colder now, clinical but still haunted. They called them the Whitakers. A family tucked away in the backwoods of Appalachia, just outside the tiny town of Odd, West Virginia. Locals didn't say much, because they knew better. Not out of fear of violence, but of something much worse. Recognition. Because everyone had heard the rumors. Generations of intermarriage, no formal education. Children born who couldn't read, write, or speak, only mimic. They barked, they grunted, they screamed at shadows that weren't there. And yet, this wasn't a horror movie. This was reality. Captured for the first time in 2004, when a documentary filmmaker named Mark Lita followed a dusty, broken path into their world. He didn't know what he'd find. What he found was a window into America's hidden rot. There were no fences, no signs, just a collapsing house and a small pack of dogs barking at the stranger's arrival. Then came Ray, a man with vacant eyes and twisted posture, responding to questions with grunts and head jerks. He couldn't form words, but he wasn't silent. No. Ray screamed. Beat. Inside the house were more like him. Lorine, Betty, Timmy. Most of them were siblings. Many of them were also cousins. Their parents, also related. Their family tree didn't branch. It looped again and again, until the difference between father and uncle, mother and sister, became meaningless. It's easy to recoil, easy to mock. That's what the internet did. When Lita uploaded his footage, people laughed, made memes, called them the barking family. But there was nothing funny about it, because the more you watched, the more it became clear. These weren't monsters. They were victims, born into something no child should ever endure. They didn't choose this. They inherited it. And that inheritance didn't just come in the form of disability. It came as secrecy, isolation, a generational silence passed down like a disease, one that kept the family trapped in their decaying house while the rest of the world moved on without them. Narrator tone, steady, chilling, shifting from intimate to systemic. West Virginia has a nickname. They call it the Mountain State. But that nickname hides something. Because in those mountains, in those winding, wooded hollows, people disappear. Not because they're taken, but because the world stops looking. And in the case of the Whitakers, it never started. The family lived in a town called Odd. Yes, that's the real name. Population under 800. No streetlights, no mayor. Just a few scattered homes, a lot of dogs, and centuries of poverty. In places like this, intermarriage wasn't a rumor. It was a survival tactic. When isolation becomes culture, when education breaks down, when mental illness becomes invisible because everyone around you is suffering the same way, the abnormal starts to look normal. And the system? It failed every time. Social services never intervened. Schools didn't raise the alarm. Medical professionals didn't come knocking. And the neighbors, they knew, but they stayed quiet. Because in towns like Odd, loyalty runs deeper than law, and shame runs even deeper than that. No one asked questions, because the answers were too ugly. And so the cycle continued, for decades, until one man with a camera came along and captured it, not for fame, but to ask a question no one else had. How did we let this happen? Mark Lee. Itam Maita didn't just film them once. He went back, year after year. He brought food, he brought clothes, and he brought attention, the kind that shines light into places where no one wants to look. But by then, it was too late to fix what had already rotted. The damage was done, the lives were broken, and all we could do was watch. Narrator tone, slow, thoughtful, eerie, but sorrowful. The Whitakers aren't just a family. They're a mirror, a cracked, dirt-covered mirror reflecting something we don't want to see. Because this isn't just a story about inbreeding. It's not even just about poverty. It's about neglect, the kind that spans generations. It's about isolation so deep it becomes invisible. And it's about a country with places it's chosen to forget. You can drive through America and see cities glowing with light, but if you take a wrong turn, you'll find hollers like Odd, towns where no one's watching, where families fall apart quietly until what's left is a haunting echo of what once was. The Whitaker story isn't over. They're still alive, still living in that collapsing house with barking dogs, broken floorboards, and a front porch stuck in time. But now the world knows. Their faces are online, their lives dissected in comment sections, their suffering turned into spectacle. And the question we're left with isn't, how could this happen? It's, how many more families are out there, just like them? Unseen, unheard, unreachable. Shadows of the past isn't just about the dead. Sometimes the most disturbing stories are about the living. For 40 years, the U.S. government ran the Tuskegee study in silence. But silence doesn't last forever. In the late 1960s, as the civil rights movement gained momentum and America was being forced to confront its racial injustices, a few brave individuals began to question what was really going on in Tuskegee. One of them was Peter Buxton, a social worker and employee at the U.S. Public Health Service. Buxton had heard disturbing things, rumors of a study where men were deliberately left untreated for syphilis. When he confirmed the truth, he filed official complaints. But instead of action, he was met with cold indifference. The study, they said, must continue. So in 1972, Buxton went public. He leaked the story to the press. The Washington Star published the exposé. Then the New York Times picked it up. And suddenly the whole country knew. The fallout was immediate. The public was outraged. The idea that a U.S. government agency had knowingly allowed men to suffer and die just to watch what happened was unthinkable. Congressional hearings were launched. The study was abruptly shut down. Of the original 600 participants, only 74 were still alive. But the damage was far from over. Dozens had died. At least 40 wives had been infected, and 19 children were born with congenital syphilis, a devastating condition that causes blindness, bone deformities, and brain damage. And yet, for decades, not a single person was held criminally accountable. It was a government betrayal that would cast a long, dark shadow over the future of medical ethics and the trust between Black Americans and the healthcare system. The Leopold and Loeb case didn't just end in a courtroom. Its ripples extended far beyond the prison gates. It forced America to confront some haunting questions. Can wealth and privilege shield someone from justice? Are certain crimes born out of psychological sickness rather than evil? And how far should society go in punishing those who commit monstrous acts? The trial marked a turning point in how the legal system considered mental health. Darrow's passionate plea against the death penalty sparked national conversations about the morality of capital punishment and the role of psychological evaluation in court. For the first time, phrases like psychopathy, moral insanity, and diminished responsibility entered everyday vocabulary. But perhaps the most unsettling legacy of Leopold and Loeb is the chilling realization of what happens when intelligence is stripped of empathy. These two young men, brilliant, articulate, cultured, were everything society praises. Yet without conscience, they became monsters in bow ties. In the end, the case became a mirror. And when America looked into it, it didn't just see two murderers. It saw the dark potential lurking in human nature itself. Leopold and Loeb wanted to commit the perfect crime. What they created instead was a perfect storm of horror, outrage, and fascination that still echoes a century later. Their story reminds us that evil doesn't always come in the form of monsters. Sometimes it wears a suit, quotes Nietzsche, and smiles. If you found this dive into the chilling minds of Leopold and Loeb compelling, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share Shadows of the Past. We uncover the darkest corners of history, because only by facing the shadows can we truly understand the light. And speaking of shadows, what happens when an entire town becomes complicit in a secret so horrifying it leaves a permanent stain on American history? In our next episode, we'll uncover the twisted truth behind the Rosewood Massacre, where silence became a weapon and justice was buried for decades. Until then, stay curious and stay in the shadows.